Oh, hey there. Let's test something, shall we? When it comes to trilogies, people often say that the second one is usually the weakest link. When it comes to video games, people will claim this is true with Mario 2 or Castlevania 2, and when it comes to movies, people will always point to the second Indiana Jones as being the worst of the trilogy. So I want to see if that's true for my videos as well, specifically with the Castlevania Advance trilogy on the Game Boy Advance. That's right, this is just another video about Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance. When I first started talking about Castlevania Circle of the Moon, I had every intention of covering all three Game Boy Advance Castlevania games. In fact, ideally, I would love to talk about every Castlevania game. But let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet. The thing is, I didn't plan on doing them so close to one another. That is, until Konami sort of forced my hand when they saw my last video and said, "Oh people actually like these games? Quick, release the Advance trilogy." And then they did so 9 days later. So yeah, what I'm getting at is you can thank me for the collection. Since it released, I played through all three games again. Yes, including Circle of the Moon, again, 2 more times in fact, because I wanted to get those sweet trophies, and figured, well, since they're fresh in my mind, I might as well go ahead and write scripts about the remaining 2. So here we are at the second game in the trilogy, arguably the most divisive of the 3. Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance was released in 2002 and is the second Castlevania game to be released on the Game Boy Advance, following the success of Castlevania Circle of the Moon. However, this time, the project was spearheaded by Koji Igarashi himself and the Konami Computer Entertainment Tokyo, and not Circle of the Moon's Konami Computer Entertainment Kobe. As I mentioned in my previous episode of Java, Koji Igarashi was not a fan of Circle of the Moon, and whether you agree with him or not, that meant that there were going to be some big changes in the next entry to the series. In a 2002 TGS interview, Koji Igarashi was quoted as saying, "Well, after Symphony of the Night, a different Konami studio worked on the Castlevania franchise, and now that it's come back to Konami Computer Entertainment Tokyo, where Symphony of the Night was made, I really want to create a game that is similar to Symphony of the Night for the Game Boy Advance." And boy did he! Not only did he recruit Ayami Kojima, who did the character designs for Symphony of the Night, to design the characters for Harmony of Dissonance, but the game shared a lot of the same themes and ideas as well, including, but not limited to, having 2 castles for the character to explore. Using his dislike of Circle of the Moon's dark palette, Igarashi wanted to make Harmony of Dissonance as bright and colorful as possible. I think you may have overcorrected just a bit there, Koji. This is the reason for the constant glow around your sprite when you play the game. They wanted to make sure that there would no longer be issues seeing your character. I'd say that while it might look a bit weird to have this permanent outline, it really does help prevent you from losing focus as to where you're at on the screen at any given time. While there are plenty of areas in the game that do look quite nice graphically, be they the unique backgrounds and many of the enemy sprites, this was not without causing another issue. Something that Harmony of Dissonance is probably the most well known for: its audio. During the same interview in 2002, Igarashi himself stated that they had to sacrifice music and focus more on the visual side of the game. What this meant was that because Harmony of Dissonance used bigger sprites with a more expansive color palette, more transparency, masks for color cycling when you get hit or cast a spell, and the ability to stretch and rotate sprites, they quite simply didn't have the space left over to fit higher quality audio into the game. I realize I kind of just word vomited at all of you right there, so for those of you who don't study up on game development or art, I'd like to take a moment to just explain what all of that actually means. First of all, something that practically everybody's already going to know is that basically all forms of media have a data size allocated to them. The Game Boy Advance cartridges are no different, and for you super nerds out there, that's anywhere between 4 megabytes and 32 megabytes. When it came to Circle of the Moon, a lot of you might have noticed that there were a lot of sprites that were reused throughout the games, and quite a lot of them are pretty small, all things considered. For every pixel that you add to a sprite, that's just more and more data that you're losing out on the cartridge, and it gets further complicated when you use more colors and more shades, let alone more and more animations. The sprites used in Harmony of Dissonance were much more detailed, larger, and better animated than that of its predecessor, therefore taking up more space. When I mentioned using masks earlier, what that means is that instead of making brand new sprites for every flashing animation of taking damage, what they do instead is just put an invisible layer over the character and color in just over the character itself and adjust the opacity a little bit to give it that flashing effect. It's a simple way of replicating the sprite in different colors without taking up as much space. What this means is that while they tried to be as efficient as possible, Harmony of Dissonance just wasn't optimized all that well, sacrificing a lot of the space on the cartridge for all these colors and effects, leaving very little room for decent quality audio. If you listen to the music in the game, the compositions themselves aren't terrible, it's just that they've been compressed so much to fit into a tiny space that they no longer sound great. When this game was released in Japan, it was under the name Concerto of the Midnight Sun. This is purely speculation on my part, but it makes me question if when it came time to localize the game, they decided to call it Harmony of Dissonance to better match the awful music quality in the game. Like a self-aware joke where they could just go, no, it was totally on purpose. See, it has dissonance in the name. Now that we've gotten all the technical development nonsense out of the way, what is this game? While it is the second in the Game Boy Advance trilogy, it's actually a direct sequel to the second Castlevania game, Simon's Quest. You take the role of Juste, or Just for you monsters out there, Belmont, the grandson of Simon Belmont and an unknown descendant of Saifa Belnades. One day, his friend Maxim returns from a training expedition, injured and with amnesia, informing Juste that their childhood friend Liddy has been kidnapped. Leading Juste to a mysterious castle, it's revealed that, surprise, it's Castlevania and it's back yet again. As you traverse through the castle, Juste will comment that at times, it's as if the atmosphere around him is changing. You'll encounter Maxim a couple of times, with his personality shifting dramatically between being friendly and being antagonistic. It's eventually revealed that when Maxim went out training, his real goal was to gather all of the relics of Dracula to destroy, much like Simon did in the second game, but upon getting the final piece, lost his memory. This is because he was not strong enough to hold back the evil, giving birth to a second evil soul in his body, which split the castle into two different layers. Depending on the layer you're on, you either meet good Maxim or bad Maxim. Juste comes equipped with the Vampire Hunter Whip, and much like Nathan Graves before him, it is the weapon that he will be using primarily through the entire game. Another carryover feature, and similar to Symphony of the Night, is the ability to find equipment and armor, as well as attachments to the tip of the whip, which might change its elemental properties, making it do a bit more damage and even allow you to charge it up and smash through certain walls. Alongside this, right from the get-go, Juste can perform both a backdash and a forward dash, and when done in quick succession, quickly become your main form of movement. This is kind of a weird one for me, because unlike Nathan Graves, Juste can just run right off the bat, and in fact, you will never see his walking animation unless you get cursed by an enemy later on in the game. His default run speed isn't terrible, but it's probably one of my least favorite animations of his. I don't know what it is, but there's just something so goofy to me seeing him run around. But therein lies another issue. You won't be seeing him run either because the dash is just that good. Unless you're trying to make very precise movements, which in this game aren't really that common, there's almost no reason to ever use the D-pad unless you're jumping. The forward and backwards dash are so damn good that you will eventually find yourself spending the entire game simply mashing the L or R buttons for the duration of your playthrough. And it's because of that I'm sort of on the fence with it. I appreciate how good it is, but on the flip side, I find it weird that simply running just feels wrong. I'm probably alone in that boat, and I'm sure that the majority of people who play this game aren't bothered by it, but to me, it's just a little bit weird. Replacing the previous game's DSS system is the new Spell Fusion system, playing off the magical abilities that Juste inherited from his Belnades lineage. Hidden in the candles throughout the castle are your typical Castlevania subweapons, which use hearts as per usual. However, there are now also elemental books that Juste can find and combine with these subweapons to cast powerful spells that consume your magic meter. With a total of 7 weapons and 5 books, that gives Juste an arsenal of 35 different spells to play around with on your adventure. Personally, I find this to be pretty cool, but I will say that I ended up settling on a couple of combinations I found early on in the game, and just used those to steamroll every enemy and boss in my path. I don't think there's necessarily any bad combinations, but there are definitely some that could be considered overpowered. Returning from Circle of the Moon and Symphony of the Night are relics, which are upgrades Juste can find throughout the castle to improve his movement, giving him new abilities such as the double jump, slide, and super jump. An improvement that was made over the predecessor is the inclusion of a merchant, which can be found in various areas in the castle. This allows you to buy and sell items to not only upgrade Juste's equipment, but keep him stocked up on healing items without having to grind for them. The only real issue I have with the merchant system in this game is that many of the merchant rooms have a weird gimmick to them, such as needing to have a certain amount of money for the merchant to even appear. Otherwise, it's just a completely empty room with a vague hint in the corner that most people will probably overlook once they enter, say the room is empty, and simply leave again thinking nothing of it. Regardless though, it is nice to have the ability to buy items this go around. As mentioned before, the other gimmick of this game is the layered castles. In Symphony of the Night, you spend the first part of the game exploring one castle, only for a second inverted castle to appear for you to explore as well. Whereas in Harmony of Dissonance, you'll often find yourself jumping back and forth between the castles constantly. You start off in Castle A until you find a teleporter, which you think might just take you to a different part of the castle, but in fact moves you from Castle A to Castle B, before eventually finding another teleporter moving you back to Castle A. It's not even until later on in the game that you gain access to look at the castle maps differently, because it's not evident that there are two castles until death straight up tells you that's what's going on. Unfortunately, there aren't really that many differences between the two castles, aside from having some different enemy placement. Some rooms might be slightly redesigned, but for the most part, the changes are few and often very subtle. Due to this, it can become quite confusing to figure out what you're supposed to be doing or where you're even going. At least in Symphony of the Night, when you're in the inverted castle, the fact that everything is upside down makes it clear as day that you're in a different castle. The layered castles in Harmony just didn't really work for me, because it felt like it was just stretching the game out by having you revisit the same areas over and over and over again. Now I do want to talk about some of these areas, because for the life of me, I cannot figure out what is going on with some of them. Returning from previous Castlevania games, you have some of the classic staples such as the castle entry and the clock tower, but then things get weird. They'll go from the Wailing Way to the Shrine of Apostates. I have no idea if that's how that's supposed to be pronounced. All while the background looks the exact same and the music doesn't really change. It's really just the same area under a new name. What was the point? Or even more confusingly, entering areas such as the Room of Illusion, where on one screen it looks like an underground lava tunnel, and in the very next screen, whatever this is, you can probably thank whatever the is going on here for the reason the audio quality in this game is so bad, because holy sh**, this is a mess. And it's not the only time you'll see this used in the game either. You'll find other areas of the game that use this effect as well. I think what gets me the most with this game is how weirdly inconsistent it seems to be. The areas in the castle don't really seem to flow into each other very well, and teleporting between the various sections of Castle A and Castle B don't seem to help with that. Alongside that, you have some areas where the background art is detailed and immersive, backgrounds that fit the environment they're trying to portray, such as the entryway, or backgrounds that just look genuinely cool, like this giant skeleton creature here. Then you have this. What the hell is this? This is quite literally the largest room in the game, where you race a metal ball, jumping over spikes and avoiding enemies, all while looking at the same copy and pasted image of a staircase spiraling into an open door over and over and over again. This is like when you were a kid, trying to set an image that was entirely too small as your Windows background, and just set it to be tiled, because you were too dumb to know better, and somehow it didn't bother your 8-year-old eyes yet. They really drew this one tile, slapped it on there, made it repeat endlessly, and said, perfect. As for the rest of the gameplay, it ranges from mediocre to pretty solid. There's no denying the fact that many areas of this game are quite linear, just being long hallways filled with enemies, and nothing all that unique to do besides just move in a straight line and attack them. But at the same time, the gameplay is really enjoyable. It's fun to fight enemies with Juste, and it's fun to use his large arsenal of spells. So while it might not have the same level of platforming versatility as some of the later entries, such as the DS trilogy of games, it makes up for that by having combat that feels like a great mix of classic Castlevania and the more modern Eggavania titles. On top of that, the bosses, for the most part, are really fun as well. None of them are all that challenging, but I think that's due in part to how strong a lot of the spells are, but the designs are good and the fights themselves are fun. With all of that being said, you might be thinking that maybe I just don't like Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance. But believe it or not, that's not true. I played this game when it first came out in 2002, and I managed to beat it just fine, meaning that I enjoyed it enough to stick with it. From that point on though, I will say that I didn't have as strong of a desire to revisit it as a lot of the other Castlevania titles. I did play through it again when it released on the Wii U eShop, and I enjoyed it for the most part, but I will say playing it again in the Advanced Collection really opened up my eyes to it. I've never really been the type of person to just write off a game if I have some issues with it. And in fact, if you go back and watch my very first episode of Java covering Dark Souls, you'll see that when I first started that series, I didn't even like it. It wasn't until I revisited the series years later that I really grew to appreciate and love it. And the same could be said for Harmony of Dissonance. Every time I go back and play the game, I enjoy it more and more. The linear hallways and poor audio quality aside, I think the biggest issue with Harmony of Dissonance is that Koji Igarashi tried to make it entirely too similar to Symphony of the Night, and because of that, it's a very safe game. It didn't really take any risks, so it comes off a bit lacking in originality. The main magic system is a lot of fun, and I think Juste is a pretty cool character, but it often feels like the potential they had was a little wasted. Say what you will about Circle of the Moon, but at the end of the day, the game definitely felt like it was trying to stand on its own without leaning so hard on a past entry for support. Regardless though, this is still a Castlevania game, plays like a Castlevania game, and feels like a Castlevania game. So if you in any way like Castlevania games, you're most likely going to like this one as well. Like I said, I don't dislike Harmony of Dissonance. It's still a great game to pick up and play. I just feel like it didn't quite meet its potential, and that's okay, because at the end of the day, it's still a fun experience. But also, can we all just agree that Maxim's sprite is terrible? I mean, what is this? So how do you feel? Is this the Temple of Doom of GBA Castlevania games? Or does it stand on its own and is truly a great entry into the series? If you agree or disagree, let me know. We've got one more game to get to in the Castlevania Advanced Collection. Now I am in the process of moving, so videos might be a little bit more delayed than normal, but it will get made eventually. That being said, my name is AJ, and this was just another video about Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance.